Um, are you recording this? I have to say, yeah.
Oh yeah, it's 3Gs.
3Gs. It's some go and gather. Grow, go and gather. Number 3 is worship, and that's where we look at a passage. I didn't understand why number 3 falls into 1, looking back rather than looking up to God, but I'm sure there's a reason for that. And so we looked at the first 2 Psalms so far. And then finally, 4 is vision and prayer for the lost. And what's the other one? Brutal facts. Okay. I can't ever make up my writing what I wrote for brutal facts. Looks like broken something, but it's the brutal facts. All right. The middle section, number 5, is the new teaching. And that's where you're looking at the 4 questions, 1 sheet of paper and 1 section. 2 weeks ago, you looked at the why disciple. Last week, the who disciple. And then you'll carry on for there's 2 more questions. The looking forward in that section will start with practice. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Anne. Okay, so we practice, then we set goals is number 7, and that's where we set to do the prayer walk and dividing up the next week's responsibility, and then number 8 is prayer.
Boom. Great job.
So why does worship number 3 go under section 1 rather than section 2?
Yeah, I like to look at it as just like when we go to church, and we're going to have our teaching. Before we have our teaching, we have a time of worship. So it prepares our hearts for that opportunity and time.
Yeah. There's that piece of it, but also it's almost a response to the care and loving accountability. So you've looked back on the week you just had, and it's saying, no matter how the care and accountability went, maybe you're going through something tough. Maybe accountability didn't go well. Maybe it's been a rough week. Maybe it's been a great week, but just taking time to say, all right, well, no matter what happened last week, now let's take time to recenter ourselves here in response to what has happened during the week and gear up for what God has for us this week. So I want to get technical with it. It doesn't really matter. If you want to put it in the middle section, that's great. This is just something to help us remember it.
Yeah, I would say like 1 and 2 are definitely, those are clearly looking back. It's like, hey, how did this past week go? Both with just how are you doing, but also with your goals. And then 3 and 4, it's more of just like centering our hearts and preparing us for the looking up portion. But yeah, as Sean said, none of this is legalistic. If you feel like something needs to be moved, go for it.
Yep.
Awesome. Cool. Well, we'll start off with the highs and lows. So get with a buddy, just share your high and low from the week. If there's any, big lows, definitely take time to pray and to care for each other through that.
Yeah, that was kind of a drag. Feel like I guess that I was service yesterday. There's the man. Boo-hoo. He makes an appearance. Boo-hoo. I already prepared. So got 65 degrees in here.
I already prepared to do your part too.
Okay, well, man, came through. Well, they left a little earlier than something. I didn't really make sure.
I was just turning it down.
Oh.
It's kind of stuffy. I didn't know if they were the rest of our same stuff. But, yeah, I thought that the service yesterday.
Yeah, that was good. It was all,
I was so nervous about it.
yeah, how'd you prepare for that? I mean, as far as, were you, right before, was it tough on you, or did you get away to pray, or how did you gather yourself? Okay. Yeah. 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 Well, everybody did really wonderful as far as emotions. I mean, they shared their emotions, but they did fall apart. So that was really
All right. So is everybody's high the chili from last week?
No,
No.
you know, that funeral that we've all been, kind of wondering and waiting and anticipating. And not real sure how it's going to go. From our friend who passed away there, that first, was yesterday.
Mm.
It was one of the best funerals that we have been to in a long time.
Wow.
Me, I don't know if y'all thought that was real.
I thought it was so wonderful where the guy who was lost shares what he knew. And that was in the beginning. And then the brother, like, okay, that's old Chuck. I know.
Yeah.
New Chuck, he
Yeah.
gets saved. You know what I mean? And it was just so like.
It was so good. I mean, it isn't
Wow.
long and a whole lot of speakers, but I mean, they had taken a lot of time, put some thought into it, and it went spectacular. It wasn't awesome.
But he had his granddaughter spoke, and she's just in college.
Mhm.
She did incredible testimony, sharing from scripture and the impact her grandfather had on her spiritually. And then both of his sons and his brother, and then somebody that he served with in the military. It was, and then Jason.
2/3 of the congregation was not from here, and we don't know how many were saved or lost, but the
Right.
gospel was very clear.
Yeah.
Good.
Wow.
Great.
That's great. What a great way to remember him and his legacy.
It was a packed house, and we took everybody downstairs and fed them afterwards, and people were just bragging on our, I don't know if I told y'all this, but I had so many people say, wow, does your church do this for everybody? You know, this is great. You guys are awesome. I even had a pastor from Valley coming to me and telling me, you know, how awesome it was that our church was doing this. We hadn't seen a church that was doing this with folks. He said,
Wow.
it must reflect well on leadership. And I was like, I said, no.
Yeah, God. was-
Yeah, I said, I can't take any credit for that.
That's awesome. That's great.
Well, let's do some of the loving accountability pieces. So last week we had some goals, just on reaching out to somebody from your Who map and asking how you can pray for them. So there was that, and then, continued prayer walking of your neighborhood. And so let's get with the same buddies and just talk about how things went, and just share with one another of what you were able to see happen this week.
Talking about the claims and stuff, or
No, our goals as far as,
oh,
somebody.
No,
Yeah.
I didn't
Yeah.
know that. I would have done
oh, yeah, I did, talk with my neighbors, who I listed on here.
You asked about prayer.
No, actually, I mean, it's just, went over there and talked with them a little bit, hopefully things gonna go that way. I got him one of those, he recently bought a house, it is, well. That's what. But, he got a Bible, and then I picked up one of those bed rooms. He was open to devotional. give it to you. But they're working on it, some of them are working on something, I don't just can't really talk about that, but you know, pray for them. Pray for sharing stuff with you.
One, I asked Beth on a conversation with her, I tried to, tell her I prayed for her. Anytime she has a prayer, I'd like to get it for her to share that. Had a semi-opportunity with a guy that did my work, but it didn't work out. I've got to be more strategic in asking, but he's going through with that. I did a walk in my neighborhood. So that's a short, the why lesson where it talks about.
Oh, yeah, that's the one you were,
You gave me last sin.
yeah, that's the one you were assigned last week.
No,
Well, I was just talking about it.
yeah.
Oh,
So, yeah, I think, it's fine, so I'd like to share that. What about you guys?
I was just gonna share with everybody, according to the rest of us, and we've had 57 total careers. Everyone needs to reach out to somebody who knows,
Alrighty. Well, how did it go? Anybody have any chances to reach out to people on your Who map and offer prayer for them?
made attempts, but didn't.
I did with one.
Mhm.
It went well. It was taken okay.
Good. It's always the attempts too, right? It's not we always talk about we can't control what happens from it, but we want to be faithful in making those attempts. And that's where we can oftentimes find God at work behind the scenes as we continue to pray for those who are lost and then start reaching out to them. I think we'll start to find that God is working on their hearts behind the scenes, and that it almost seems too easy. We're like, oh, well, I didn't have to do anything other than just be there and show up and do something. And God was already working behind the scenes.
One of the people on my list, I found something, she looks at this list before. Anyway, she's very good. And I asked her, you know, and she'll see. And she was pregnant, and she said, you know, so it was, I needed, she couldn't go into it. She said, well, she was whispering to me and saying that, you know, something happened and she had a DNC. And she was just like, she just awful. That's what it was. So anyway, so I wrote, you know, I wanted to say that there was really people there. But I just, you know, things, you know, call me. So I just think that, you know, it's sad. And then, the other one, he's invited us for dinner tonight, so I'm like, okay, let's, I hope, you know, that opens up that door. And I was telling, what's her name, Michelle, that God just opened up the door this week. I was hesitant, but the Lord just opened it up and just put some, prisoners that were cleaning up the trash.
On Solid
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I
And,
saw.
I don't know, and I said, well, you know, I don't need to talk to them, but if they say something, I want to be faithful. And so, of course, someone did say something, and it just came out like, you know, you're paying a debt to society, because you broke all. Whatever you broke, you're paying a debt. And I said, well, you know that all of your sins that the law hasn't found, somebody's paid that debt. Anyway, I just shared that Jesus, you know, that's kind of process. Anyway, it was good. It was good.
This is on the run.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw the one my that's Pick that up.
Awesome.
All righty, well, we're gonna, keep going on the accountability piece of the, we reached out to somebody who is far from God and offered prayer, but we're gonna keep bumping that up a little bit each week and moving toward where we start to grow used to being uncomfortable, and having some of those conversations, which is a good place to be in. And so going on to worship, I believe, Michelle, was that you who signed up to lead us through worship this week?
Psalm 3,
Psalm 3. It's a shorter song, but whenever I do these, I always want to dig in to find out what's going on in the song. So this is with David. He says, "O Lord, how my adversaries have increased. Many are rising up against me. Many are saying of my soul, there is no deliverance for him in God. Selah. But thou, O Lord, art a shield about me, my glory, and the one who lifts my head. I was crying to the Lord with my voice. He heard me and answered from his holy mountain. Selah. I lay down and slept. I awoke, for the Lord sustains me. I will not be afraid of the 10,000s of people who have set themselves against me, have set themselves against me round about." I think let's see on the inside. "Arise, O Lord, save me, O my God. Thou hast smitten all my enemies on the cheek. Thou hast shattered the teeth of the wicked. Salvation belongs to the Lord. Thy blessing will be upon thy people." Selah. And I found out when this is when David was grieving his son Absalom, who had gone, and they had all this stuff between them, and Absalom had died. And David loved his son very much, as he should have. And I was just looking at that and just thinking about that, and it was just David's prayer was coming from it was the most honest and raw prayer that you can have. And but with the trust of the Lord the whole time he was doing it. He was honest, it was raw, he was trusting the Lord the whole time, which is what we should do. But we, pointing to me, don't always do that because we're human. But this was awesome to me, to think about how what the Lord does and how David was just right there in the Lord's bosom, seeking and crying out, knowing that the Lord's with him. And that's how he did us. And that's how
Great.
Yeah. Any other thoughts from anybody else after reading through Psalm 3 that stands out about who God is?
I like the verse 5 where it says, "I lay down and sleep, I woke again, for the Lord sustains me." That just how God protects us and takes care of us when we're even not aware or unconscious.
Yes. We really don't have to feel it. But he is emotional. It's definitely in war. Yeah, all this is in war. And it's just reminds us that, and you are the God of what you are. You have to bring our soul and what people like to feel.
One thing mentioned to me was verse 8 talks about salvation being belongs to God. And that kind of takes the pressure off a little bit when you start sharing the gospel, because sometimes it tends to think that we got to say, we know that we don't, but we feel like we fail if they don't, come around. But oftentimes it takes many times sharing the gospel with people so that you can say, so salvation belongs to God. It's me, and not you.
That's why we said waking up. Like what Jason said this morning, we're not promised to wake up. I mean, but the Lord provides us to wake up in the morning. Jason, his sermon this morning wasn't about waking up in the morning. But things are falling about us. We're not promised to get up, but the Lord sustains us and he gets us up. He does not, but he did. So
there's such a theme of prayer in here too. I mean, obviously the whole song is prayer, but verse 4, he says, I cried out unto the Lord and he answered me. Verse 7, it says, arise, O Lord, and save me. It said, talk about how he's not afraid, and how much the Lord lifts him up, and he's going to strike all the enemies and break the teeth of the wicked. It's a real, I guess, an uplifting song for those who are being attacked. Be attacked from enemies.
That's right. Go back to, whatever you're doing, loving accountability, because this is so good. Okay, so at the bar, this is so good. I'm just thinking like, I'm so tired of working one. Okay, so last Sunday night, Dan and I and this other lady, we were talking about some stuff, and I had asked them, how should I, should I bring up the fact that you're living in sin again, you know what I mean? And one of the ladies said, no, don't. And Dan said, well, you can say they're believers. And you should, you're a brother and sister. Okay, because Thursday mornings I just started first choice. It's our first choice. So anyway, so we prayed. And Thursday morning, I did not look at what we were to do on last day. And lo and behold, the scripture that Steve believe is we talked about their the blessing and the Holy Spirit, because we're talking about the Holy Spirit. But the scripture that we pulled out was all on how can you do this when Christ is living in you? And I'm like, well, Lord, I didn't have to say anything because you just
So that's right.
it was so sweet how God just like done about
Wow.
you just be faithful and open. I'm going to call you.
Well,
Yeah,
thank
Lord,
you for
just like-
update. I mean, I just,
It was just so good. It was just like,
Well, I appreciate you want to go back, because I remember, yes, I did contact someone and ask them how I could pray for them. And they really had some much prayer requests, and they were very appreciative. And it helped us bond more as friends to, so I think it kind of happens a lot during the week, you just do it so often, sort of forget about it, but I had family issues and some really hard stuff that could divide brothers, so. Praise the Lord.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
A lot of hurt and a lot of brokenness that we'll find as we are asking people. So it's good. All right, well, let's I believe Ann, you are up for going through the brutal facts, is that right?
yes, I have a little back. So.
Oh, no, not for man.
Immorality.
No,
I
no.
like it.
No, so we have a population of what? 70,000. And so they say that's like 75%. So that's like 1,000 people in our wee little town have not heard the gospel. And so we go back to Acts where Paul shared, like, he was able to say, hey, we covered Asia, and that was what, 8 million people in a span of 3 years, 2 years, and then they all heard the gospel. So the whole place is like no place left. So that's the cry from like Romans, like we want to make sure on our watch, people in our generation, right, while we're living. So the question is, what would it take for this to happen? And what are we willing to give up? And die for? To reach the people. That was it. That's it.
Boom.
That was great.
Right on target.
Nice and concise and to the point. I like that.
I love it. That was
Yeah.
awesome.
It's
Good
hopefully this is something, this is a vision tool that you can use as you communicate with other believers in your area, just to, even, I love the way you did it, Ann, because it's you're just, hey, here's the situation. Here's an example in scripture, and we got to ask these questions. And so you're sitting at lunch with another believer, and you can communicate that to them. Because we always talk about that believers need vision and training. We need vision for what God wants to do through us, and then training on how to do it. And so this is a good way to stir up other people and encourage them to get involved in what the Lord's doing in our area and to join us in it. So awesome. Thanks for sharing. So Taylor.
All right. Okay, so we're gonna take out our 401 sheets again. Stop sharing. So right now we have our sheet that's folded, and I just grabbed a random sheet of paper, so I don't have my 401 out yet. But so on the front page we have what question? What question do we go over on this front page? Why? Why do we make disciples? We talked about how it's our identity, and we see that in 2 Corinthians 5. And so then we open it. What is the next question that we went over? Who? So we talked about people we know and people we search for. That's who we share the gospel with. And so now we're going to be on this side of the page. And we're going to be answering the question of what. So what do we say? So I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to write what in the corner. And today, to answer the question of what, we're actually going to be learning 2 tools. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a line in the middle of my page to separate these tools. And so these 2 tools, the top part, we're going to learn how to share my story. So how do you share your story? So I'm going to put my story. And then on the bottom, we're going to learn how to share God's story. And so today we're only going to be filling in the top half. We're going to do the bottom half next week. So just focus in on that top portion with me. So to share our story, we're going to use a tool called the 15-second testimony. And yes, I know that sounds a little crazy, but we're going to actually learn how to share your testimony in 15 seconds today. And we'll talk about why this is so important later on. But to give you an example of what this should sound like when we're done, I'm going to give you guys my 15-second testimony. So there was a time in my life when I felt sad and hopeless, but then I learned of the love and forgiveness of Jesus, and I surrendered my life to him, and now I have joy and I have hope. Joe, do you have a story like that?
Yeah, there was a time in my life when I felt lonely and unappreciated. And then I met Jesus and learned about his grace and his love, and I surrendered to him. And now I feel included, and I feel like I have the joy of the Lord. Awesome. John, do you have a story like that?
I do. So there's a time in my life I was broken and I was living selfishly. But I learned of the love and forgiveness of Jesus, gave my life over to him, and now I have peace and I have a purpose to live for. Do you have a story like that?
Awesome. So I'm sure you guys kind of see a pattern, but all 3 of our stories are different. And so that's what we're doing. We're following a pattern, but we're technically going to make it our story so that we can share that with other people. So do you guys remember what introduction all 3 of us started with? There's a time in my life. Yes. So we're going to write underneath our 15-second testimony. We're going to write, there was a time in my life. And I want you, life does not have 2 E's. Okay. Lifey. I want you to turn to your buddy and say, there's a time in my life. There was a time in my life.
There was a time in my life.
Awesome. That's going to be the hardest part of today. No, I'm kidding.
There's a time in my life when my heart was very dark.
Awesome. So we have our intro, there's a time in my life. And so what we're going to do now, we love arrows. So we're going to put an arrow looking back And we're going to put 2 lines underneath that arrow. And so what we want to put in those 2 lines are words that would represent what we were like before Christ came into our life. So for me, I felt sad and hopeless. And so these can be words that represent things you felt, things you did, things you said, just 2 words of what would explain you best before Christ came into your life.
Yeah, and don't get too hung up on finding the perfect words,
Yeah.
because this is, you're not set and you can only say this if you're sharing your story. Just find 2 things that would have marked you for Christ.
Final answer.
Yeah, like that's your final answer. You
Final
can't ever
answer.
use any other words.
Uh,
I say that because we've trained this before and we've sat here and someone's sitting there for 10 minutes trying to come up with the perfect words. I'm like, just 2 words, just anything that marks you before Christ. It's not the last thing you'll ever get to say about what you were like.
But can I say this? I mean, actually, before I came to Christ, I mean, I had a lot going for me. I was playing ball in college. I was dating a girl. I had a car. I mean, a lot of wonderful things were happening. I was a moral kid. So God didn't lead me down a path of sadness and tribulation necessarily. I mean,
yeah. Yeah, I know for me, so when I was learning this for the first time ever, I didn't know what to put in those 2 lines because I came to Christ when I was 12. And so for me, like before I came to Christ, I didn't eat my vegetables. I didn't clean my room. Like there wasn't many things that I could put there because I was so young. But something else that I started to think of is, no matter if you've been following Jesus since you're 12 or since you're, within the last year, we've all had times in our walk with Christ where we feel more distant from Christ, right? There's seasons where we just don't feel like we're that close to Jesus. And so if, you guys can't think of 2 words, just think about a time when you maybe struggled in your relationship with God and choose 2 words of how you felt then. So yeah, that's kind of what I know I struggled with this a little bit too. And someone told me that and I was like, oh, okay, that helps me. See, Joe, what are your 2 words?
Yeah, I put down lost and lonely.
Great. John?
I'd say broken and selfish.
So there was a time in my life when I was sad and hopeless. So what I want you to do, if you have your 2 words, I want you to turn to your buddy and do the intro in your 2 words. So there was a time in my life when I was blank and blank. Just take turns saying that to your buddy.
First time I felt selfish.
Life when I was broken and selfish.
the other.
Not good news.
That was the time when I was felt just sort of dry in my life and all that stuff.
You had all these things going for it, but you still felt empty. Is that what you?
Well, actually, I didn't feel empty until I realized.
Until he
Until I realized I was hope. I didn't even realize that.
Until he told me that I'm miserable and selfish and not good and I'm on my way out. At that moment.
I was very sad when I thought about that.
That's it.
Right.
That's it up there. I was only Sunday doing it, I realized there's something wrong.
Feeling lost. You feeling like this is the best thing.
Yeah, when I started, he just gradually unveiled the curtain, and I went, it's not good. I need to do something about this. I want to be on the team, so.
But I also had the crisis like I heard you talking about the parents. I was really desperate, and so that was part of the larger.
So what are your words?
Self-centered, because everything in life was good. They were all good to me.
Yeah, I would love to hear everyone's words. So we just heard Jason's. Who else wants to share?
Dry and unsure. No, I didn't even think about the word unsure until you said something. And I knew sure, but the other, oh my goodness.
Until you found sure.
I'm not sure, oh my word. You're so saying the truth. So I was That was kind of what Jason just said. I didn't really realize it until I began to believe. Then I could see how unstable I was, even though I was confident.
Interesting. That's cool. All right.
Not are comfortable, but yet empty.
That's a good one.
I don't know, selfish. I mean, really. My husband is still like that.
Oh, yeah, no, I know, so
Yeah.
something we
I really,
wore.
I'm like messed up to the point. Really, that's what I tell people. I was so messed up to people. I really was. I was.
All right.
Self-sufficient, helpful.
All right, we're gonna add on. So there was a time in my life when I was sad and hopeless. So what we're gonna do now is in the middle of your page, I want you to draw a cross with a crown on top. And then we're gonna put 3 lines underneath that cross. And so in those first 2 lines, we want to put words that would represent things that drew us to Christ. So for me, I have that his love drew me to him and his forgiveness that he offered me. And so honestly, a lot of people use love and forgiveness. So if you want to steal those words, feel free to. But if you have 2 other words that are just really specific to your story, by all means use them. Like, what drew you to Christ? What made you want to follow him? So right now we have, there was a time in my life when I felt sad and hopeless, but then I learned of love and forgiveness of Jesus. And so in that last line, we want to put the word surrender. And we want to mention in our story that we surrendered our life to Jesus. A lot of people believe in God, believe in Jesus, but it's the surrender piece that changes things. And so we want to emphasize that we surrendered our life to Jesus, not the big guy upstairs, but to Jesus. So we want to use the name of Jesus. So there was a time in my life when I felt sad and hopeless, but then I learned of the love and forgiveness of Jesus, and I surrendered my life to him. All right. Guess what? Turn to your buddies and go from the intro to the surrender piece.
In my life, that felt selfish and hopeless. And then I learned the love and mercy of Jesus and surrendered.
Well, at the time of my life, when I was riding the because of Jesus' love and kindness.
We all do that every time you say that.
So,
I thought you almost did it.
I'm right about since the last round.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh, my goodness.
Sorry,
Okay, I want to change my word.
No.
No, don't. I would feel arrogant if you did. Just keep it. I'll feel dry. Just keep it.
You remember that.
I think it's right, and you should guard against it.
Oh, boy, here comes. And now I'm always on most spots.
Hey, you represent that.
Let's call the old spots.
So when you have Jason back,
So, there was a time in my life when I was self-centered and desperate, but during the relationship that I felt offered a little, because of the relationship that I felt, surrendered my life.
Boom. So anybody else, did anyone use any different words than love and forgiveness?
I use mercy.
I thought I was supposed to fill out all 3 of those lines with those kinds of words. But anyway, I did put there patience because, it's incredible patience.
Yeah.
He didn't wait for me to clean up my act. He died even though I was still.
Yeah.
his enemy.
I love that. That's a great.
I put relationship, because that's what I was looking for in my life, was that relationship. Something other than me, because it wasn't working. And the help offered, God is our helper. Is our shield. I was desperate, so I needed that.
Yeah. Great.
No, I feel like this love, this line is sure to become more revelation.
All right. Okay. So we're going to add on. So far, we have there was a time in my life when I felt sad and hopeless, but then I learned of the love and forgiveness of Jesus and I surrendered my life to him. And so now what we want to do is we want to look on our life now and going forward of what's changed in our life now that we follow Jesus. What's different about us? And so we're going to put 2 more lines in 2 words that would represent what our life is like, who we are, what we are now that Christ is in our life. So for me, I have joy and I have hope. So mine are actually the exact opposite from before. They don't have to be opposites, but just 2 words of what's different about you. Maybe now you have a purpose. Maybe you're happier now. What's changed in you? 2 words that would represent that. So there was a time in my life when I felt sad and hopeless, but then I learned of the love and forgiveness of Jesus and I surrendered my life to him. And now I have joy and I have hope. Joe, what are your 2 words?
Purpose and meaning in life.
Purpose and meaning. What are yours?
I say peace and purpose.
Peace and purpose. All right. So turn to your buddy and go from the intro to what your life is like now.
There was a time in my life where I felt self-centered and desperate. Lost the call of Jesus, relationship. Felt here in my life.
There's a time in my life when I felt selfishness and helpless and the world, the mercy of Jesus, and I surrendered my life to him. Now I have purpose.
Well, that was a time in my life when I felt dry and unsure. But, well, I learned love and compassion, and I spent my life with Jesus, and now I'm sure and confident.
What is the transition there?
Yeah.
Maybe as I learned, from self-centered and desperate to, relationship.
Yeah, what was that transition?
What's the, time in my life where I was self-centered and desperate? Then I learned of a relationship?
Yeah, there are a lot of different ways you could say it. The way Taylor says it and the way I say it a lot of times is, yeah, then I learned of the love and forgiveness of Jesus. And that led me to surrender my life to him. Other people say,
I experienced.
then I experienced Jesus.
All right.
Then I met Jesus and surrendered my life to him. Just
Or you can-
something about your experience of encountering Christ.
Yeah, or you can say, I came to a place where I heard about Jesus's love and mercy and I surrendered to him.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of those tools where you go home and you practice it and you figure out your transition. Not all the transitions have to be the same because we're all not the same people. So if you have a transition that just works better for you, use it, because then that means you'll actually use this tool.
Yeah, the only thing that's non-negotiable about this middle piece is saying the name of Jesus.
Okay.
Everything else you can talk about, but you got to say you experienced Christ in some way.
Yeah, I think for this tool and then the tool we learn next week, I went home. I remember my dad made my family take turns presenting these tools as a family every night so that we could get it down. And it was Sunday night. My dad's like, hey, Monday night, I want you to go over the 15-second testimony. And I was like, because I just learned it. I didn't think I knew it. And so literally all day Monday night, I got all my homework done. And Monday I'm homeschooled. So Monday I spent all day going over the 15-second testimony a million times. And through that, I finally figured out my transition. And so this is one of those tools. You just go home, say it a million times, try different transitions and see what is going to work for you. But yeah, as Sean says, leave Jesus in there and ultimately you're just sharing your story. So that's a fun tool.
Make sure it's your own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't want to use language and wording that doesn't sound like you. Keep it natural.
Awesome. All right. So there was a time in my life when I was sad and hopeless, but then I learned of the love and forgiveness of Jesus, and I surrendered my life to him. And now I have joy and I have hope. And so the big thing with this tool is obviously we want to get our story to the other person, but this is also used as a bridge to the gospel. So this is not the gospel. No one will get saved off of your 15-second testimony, but this is a bridge to the gospel. So the hope is that we would be able to share the gospel after our 15-second testimony. And so the question is, well, how do we bridge over to the gospel? And so we always end this tool with a question. We ask, do you have a story like that? And so if I'm sharing this with John, I end it with, hey, do you have a story like that? And he can say, yes, I do, and tell me a story, or he can say no. And then it's a great transition to say, well, hey, can I show you how I got that story and share the gospel with him? And so that's the great part of this tool. You're not just saying, oh, now I have joy and hope and yeah, peace out. You're saying, hey, do you have a story like that? And you're getting to hear where they are in their relationship with God and how you can best help them take next steps with Jesus. So there was a time in my life when I was sad and hopeless, but then I learned of the love and forgiveness of Jesus, and I surrendered my life to him, and now I have joy and I have hope. Michelle, do you have a story like that?
There was a time in my life when I felt very comfortable, but very empty at the same time. But then I found love and forgiveness through Jesus, and I surrendered my life to him. And now I live life with peace and assurance.
You want to ask someone else?
Like that.
That's somebody else. She had learned that part.
Yeah, learned that part, yeah.
Say your story.
Okay, so, there was a time in my life that I was dark, nothing. What am I saying? This is so weird because I'm not, okay, so.
Yeah, maybe you are.
I know, I'm trying to think, like, oh, what do I usually say? So, anyway, and then.
The 15-second part is really hard for me.
No, I listen, you know, I will say to people, if you have an encounter, it's changed your life. That's what, if you have an encounter.
Well, it's kind of like what I said.
I know that. Okay, so listen, and I've learned, many things, that I've learned that he was looking for goodness, that's really fun. Now I have.
Yes, once I was, did not have any deodorant. Have y'all been catching this little funny thing we've been doing?
I honestly, we can't hear everything y'all are saying. We can hear when y'all speak really loud. So we're probably missing out on a lot of the funny things going on.
Actually, when you said, just thinking of a time when, things weren't going so good, I thought, well, there was a time when things were real dry and just, I didn't feel like I was in touch with God. And I wasn't very confident, so I said I was dry and unsure. So sure is a deodorant.
No. Okay.
Dry and unsure, I
Yes.
was like, I had a pun, I didn't even realize it.
Oh,
No,
man.
I'm sorry, that stinks.
Wow.
Anything?
Sorry, guys. Ron and I have to go. It was great seeing y'all.
Yeah.
Suddenly, yeah.
Say you're doing this with somebody, they just bust out laughing. Right, I'm sure.
Right. That's great.
Oh, That was a time in my life when I was dry and unsure, but then I experienced the love and compassion of Jesus, and I surrendered to him my life. Now I'm sure and confident.
You could make a commercial.
Yeah.
Yeah. Next Super Bowl
I can't
commercial.
believe how this is all come together so well. Story like that? Or you already told her story.
You
No,
could make a commercial for the middle school guys at our church to wear deodorant. So-
Oh,
At least I got it corrected, you know.
there's a time in my life where I felt extremely self-focused and felt helpless and hopeless. But I experienced the love and mercy of Jesus and I surrendered my life to him. Now I have purpose. Do you have a
Perfect.
story like that?
Yeah.
Shared yet?
Yes, there was a time in my life where I was self-centered and desperate, but I learned the help offer through a relationship with Jesus. And so I surrendered my life to him, and now I have purpose and a desire. You have a story like that, Joe?
Yeah. No, there was a time in my life when I was lost and lonely. And then I heard about Jesus and his grace and love. I accepted his forgiveness and surrendered to him. And now I feel confident and sure of where I'm going. John, do you have a story like that? And so on.
Yeah, funny you ask, and it actually sounds very similar to yours. There was a time in my life I was broken, and I was living for myself. And God got a hold of me. I learned of the love and forgiveness of Jesus and surrendered my life over to him. And now I have peace and I have a purpose to live for. Anybody else have any other stories like that?
Well, let me tell you how I have done it, and it's more than 15 seconds, but I would say, you know, there was a time in my life where everything was going right. And
Yeah.
then I got a little testament from the Gideons. You probably heard of the Gideons, they put the Bibles in hotels and motels. And I began to read the little testament, and I found out that I wasn't going to heaven. And so I simply asked God to forgive me, and I put my trust in Jesus Christ, and now I'm saved born again. Has that ever happened in your life?
Boom.
See,
Love it.
that's the beauty of this tool is we train on 15-second testimony, but the whole thing is that it's adaptable. So
Very
if
flexible.
you're sitting down with someone having coffee, you may use the same pattern, but maybe not in 15 seconds. You may, get in more details of like, well, I felt sad because this happened and God intervened this way. It's adaptable. And I love how you did it. It wasn't 15 seconds, but it was keeping to the pattern and still concise and to the point.
Yeah.
The point is we're learning how to flip a conversation. And
Mhm.
so this isn't, there's a time for sitting down with somebody and sharing our full story of what God has done in our life and how we had an encounter with Christ and this is what has changed and walking through the story and relating to them. But this is just in an everyday conversation where somebody's talking about something and you realize, man, I can flip this to a spiritual conversation. But how do I flip it? Do I just say, Jesus loves you and like hope that it gets there? Or, what do I do? Or I go to church, like, what do I say? And so it's if you're like me, I know I've been in many situations in the past with like a coworker or a friend where they start talking about something and I'm like, man, they're going a direction where this could easily flip to a spiritual conversation, but I have no idea how to get it there. And so this creates something where maybe you're sitting with somebody, maybe they're talking about dealing with some sort of broken thing in their life. Like, man, my wife and I have just been arguing quite a bit. There's a time my wife and I really struggled with arguing with one another, but really it was the love and the mercy that Jesus offers that kind of turned that around. Has anything like that happened to you? And so it's taking a conversation and just flipping it around. One example that was helpful for me was I was talking to a friend one time. I was just messaging him. We were talking through Facebook, and I hadn't talked to him in a long time, and we were messaging back and forth. And then I said, "Hey, man, I like praying for people. Is there anything going on in your life I could pray for?" And he said, "Whoa, all religious and spiritual all of a sudden." And so, well, there was a time that I really wasn't that way, but Jesus changed my life, and now I like praying for people. Has anything like that happened to you? And all of a sudden, it's taking just what might have been kind of an awkward standstill of, oh yeah, spiritual, and flipped the conversation into an opportunity to where maybe he shared in that situation, he says, "Oh no, not really. I haven't really, that's not happened to me." And so now you have an opportunity to speak into that and talk about what Jesus has done for you and share the gospel. And other times they may say, actually, yeah, I have a story like that. This is what happened to me. Jesus changed my life. And you're like, man, that's awesome. And you have
Yeah.
another believer that you can encourage.
Yeah, I think the thing with this tool, like, to be honest, when I first saw it, I thought it was very cheesy and thought I would never use it. But the thing that the 15-second testimony does is it does two things. I mean, it starts to tune your ear to brokenness. So before, when your coworker is talking about their marriage being rough, you're just like, oh, I'm sorry to hear that. I'll be praying for you. But now when you're hearing that, you're like, oh, wait, I can take that and turn this into gospel conversation, or just like little things. Like I know, like, randomly people will just be talking about like little things that are just kind of like demonstration of brokenness. And now it's like, oh, okay, here's my time. And so your ear starts to be tuned to brokenness. And then also like the intro of there's a time in my life, I thought that was cheesy, but now that I know this tool, you hear it all the time, like all the time. Yeah, there's a time in my life when I used to go to Chipotle every day. It wasn't good for me. You know, you start to hear it. And so it's interesting. My dad was actually he was on he was on staff at our church, and they did like a boating team building thing every year. And the guy that was like riding the boat for them, driving the boat, I don't know the correct term for that.
The captain.
Navigating.
Navigating the boat, he made a comment like, there was a time in my life I used to work nonstop. And my dad's like, there it is. There was a time in my life I worked nonstop too, but then I learned the love and forgiveness of Jesus, and I just have a different purpose in life now. Anything like that happen to you? And just like that. And it's just interesting. Your ear starts to be tuned to those things.
You think about how you act toward any other experience you have in your life that was meaningful to you. And I mean, just think about like with a restaurant, maybe somebody's talking about, man, I can't stand burgers. Like, oh, I used to not like burgers either, but then I had this burger over here and it was excellent. Have you tried that burger before? You should go to that restaurant. They have excellent burgers. And so you become an advocate for it because you had an experience with it. And so it's just a simple thing of anything you do with one of my best friends, my best friend from college. He is the biggest evangelist for every product or service that he buys.
Give you an example. We just bought his couch about a week ago.
Yeah, the same couch he got.
He convinced us it's the best couch ever.
But what he'll do is, so he's a platinum member with American Airlines, and he's real proud of it too. So, but it's funny because he'll say, "Well, John, what credit card do you have? What kind of points do you get? Because I used to get this kind of points, but then I switched here, and this is what it does for me. What do you get?" And so he's using those same principles on every product he gets because he had a meaningful experience. Something changed in his life. How much more should we be advocating for the King of Kings who brought us out of darkness into light? It's like, it's just, we should be excited about that to flip conversation. But, you speak of that. Actually, I had something like that too, but Jesus changed me, and this is what happened now. Has that happened to you?
Yeah, I think so. Let me point out. Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna share quickly. So sort of the reverse happened to me where in my job, I met with people and we would start out with a little short talk, and then he began to share with me how AA had changed his life, and he was very excited. About midway, guy, tapped me on the shoulder and says, "You're coming up next," And so I said, "Wow, that is fantastic. I'm so glad to have you. Can I share with you something that happened to me in my life?" He said, "Sure." And I shared the gospel with him. And it's almost like, because I listened to him, that gave me permission for him to listen to me.
Right.
And then about a year, he did accept the car. I gave him a little testament day. He didn't accept Christ, whatever. 2 years later, I was in a courthouse, and he walked up to me, and he said, "Do you remember me?" I said, "Oh yeah." I can't remember his name, but he said, "Do you remember the day that you gave witness to me?" That's how he shared. And I said, "Yes, I do." And he said, "That made all the difference." and turned around and walked off. I didn't get a chance really to find out the details. They said,
Yeah.
and all the difference.
Yeah,
Wow,
So,
that's
Wow.
powerful.
born again, you know, I mean, it was wonderful.
that's awesome.
Seed planted.
Praise God for that. Those are the win stories. Sometimes we don't ever get to hear that.
Yeah.
And then, but sometimes we see it on the front end. But it's just, man, we got to be faithful to be sharing with people what Christ has done in our lives and sharing the good news of salvation with other people. And
Yeah.
God works in that in ways we don't always understand.
Yeah, I think something that's cool about this tool is, it's also biblical. You just look throughout the New Testament and see people who had encounters with Jesus. Let's take Zacchaeus, for example. He was stealing from people, but he met Jesus and his life was changed and he gave back 4 times what he stole, right? I was thinking like the Gerasene demoniac. There was a time in my life I was in the tombs cutting myself naked, but then I learned of the love and forgiveness of Jesus, and now I'm clothed and in my right
Yeah,
mind.
this guy Jesus came along and cast out demons into a bunch of pigs, and now I'm in my right mind.
Do you have a story like
That
that?
happened to you?
Then they're gonna look at you and go, I don't know about you.
I'd be like, I'm gonna keep an eye on this
It's like
one.
you have to have a bad testimony to be able to get saved, you know,
Yeah.
the good kid beforehand, so.
Yeah, it's just in all these examples, these people who had encounters with Jesus, they didn't go to seminary and have all this knowledge. All they had was a testimony of how Jesus changed their life. And through that short testimony, whole cities came to know Christ, right? And so that's something to keep in mind. I think it's easy to say, oh, this is cheesy, but this is literally all they had in the New Testament
And
was a testimony.
what happens with this too is that, oftentimes this will be almost a diagnostic for where we really stand with Christ. Have you had an experience? Has something changed? Anything? And we've had plenty of times when we've been doing a training like this, and maybe somebody's just doing it one-on-one. Example, we were up in New York and we were doing a training with a church up there, and we learned as we were training this tool that a lot of the folks in the church,
Most of them.
were not saved.
So
They were
even-
not following Christ, because as we got to the 15-second testimony, they're going, well, I don't have a story. I've never had any experience like that. And it's like, oh, okay, well then let's start over. Let's hammer the gospel out before we get into
Yeah.
talking about how to share your story. But what this does is, it's like, man, the reality is, if you've had a story, if you've had something change in your life because of Jesus, then you're going to want to share that. It's going to come naturally.
What was that?
Did they get saved? Did any of them trust Christ?
One of them did. So he was
He was actually on staff at the church.
he was on staff at the church,
Oh, wow.
and so he was a young guy. He was probably
20?
college age.
Yeah.
And so we have one of our best friends is also college age, and his story was he actually grew up in the church, was very much viewed as a leader in the church, and he realized when he got to the end of high school that he was just playing the game and was not really in a relationship with God. He didn't know Jesus, and so he happened to be the one partnered up with this guy as he went through the 15-second testimony and realized, hey, look, man, if you don't have a story, don't force it. Let's talk more about this. And he met with him throughout the week that we were there. And eventually the guy was like, yeah, I want that story. I want to surrender to Christ.
Yeah, we were working with a Korean church, and in that culture, it's just the big holdback for this guy in the training was that like his relationships would change drastically, his friendships. And so as Toby, our best friend, is sharing the gospel with him, you start to see him count the cost of like, well, this is true and I want to follow this. I'm going to have to give up my friendships. Like the guys that I play video games with aren't going to want to play video games with me anymore. And he still chose to follow Jesus. And so it was cool to see that. But
Yeah, for sure.
yeah, as Sean said, it's always interesting when you go train a church and find like, hey, all right, we need to camp out here. Like this is where we need to be sharing the gospel. So I know we just rambled. Joe, do you have anything to add to that 15-second testimony stuff?
It's such a cool tool in the sense that you can adapt and use it for just about anything with any situation. And while we put our, two different things that are on the, what it is that we have, there's a lot more of our own life experience that if you listen carefully to what other people are saying, you can relate to them, then you can change what you have on your 15-second testimony to adapt to what they're saying. Yeah, there was a time in my life that I never really paid any attention to spiritual things, and I was just living for myself. And then I heard about Jesus, and whatever it is that you're hearing from the other person, you just pull that right in, and it helps you to quickly turn it around. What it does too is it takes the ball off of you and puts it on the other person. And now it causes them to think. And the less you speak and the more they have to think about how they relate to it, the more that they internalize the question.
And you don't have to make things up to relate. So it's
No.
like, if somebody starts sharing a story about, man, I just wasn't a good parent. I've been treating my kids wrong, and you don't have kids. Don't say, well, yeah, there was a time I wasn't a good parent either. And like, don't make something up, but it's finding ways to relate to other people and
Right.
share what Christ did for you.
Right.
And I think, Joe, you make a great point. Like all of this we want to do out of care. We don't want to be transactional. And to be able to listen to them and find a way for you to relate to them, just a way of showing like, hey, I care for you and I understand what you're feeling. And then you're also asking the question, well, do you have a story like that? So again, you're like letting them talk and getting to hear from them and asking questions. And so all of this is out of care and love for that person. And so that's a big thing. Just don't make it transactional. Just do it out of care and love.
Yeah, and a lot of times too, when you let's say you're talking with somebody that you're knocking on the door and you're just saying, hey, how can I pray for you? And you hear something in the prayer that you can relate to. It's a great way to be able to transition there too.
I think it's good for us. Now, I'm speaking for me, you're speaking for us, but I think since today is like our first day hearing this, that it's good to know that it's a little more malleable and adjustable to
Oh, yeah.
the circumstance, because it seemed very mechanical when we started, because Steve is dry and unsure. It sounds better because if you have a good testimony, you can kind of shape it to the scenario that you're in.
Yeah, it's not all about good deodorant and being sure and dry.
We've all had.
You're certainly not walking up to people randomly saying, hey, Joe, there was a time in my life when I was broken and selfish, and then I learned of the love and forgiveness of Jesus. It's a framework for you to think, hey, before Christ, what happened? And then because of Christ, has that happened to you? And just a simple statement to say, this is what Christ has done for me. Have you experienced that?
Sure. My I always laugh. I like to share this. My dad's a bold dude. He likes
to say the least.
He likes to like trap people. So he'll like, trying to think of an example, he'll literally like he'll get his hair cut, once a month, however often he gets his hair cut, but he specifically goes to different places to get his hair cut so he can talk to different people, and he'll ask them questions and try to get a certain answer so he can use the 15-second testimony. Like, so John, do you ever get rude people?
I deal with rude people all the time. Yeah,
there was a time in my life I was pretty rude too, but then I learned love and forgiveness, and like that's my dad asks questions to trap people. Or he'll my brother used to play baseball, and he'll sit in the bleachers with this one guy, and he was reading his Bible, and the guy asked what he would read, and he's like, hey, there's a time in my life I would never read the Bible, but then Jesus changed my life. And so you want to get bold and
I find myself reading the Bible. Does anything happen to you like that?
Anyways, it's a great tool to use. And I think for me, the biggest thing, it's just open, as I said, it's tuned my ear to brokenness, which before this tool, I was never looking at brokenness and thinking like, oh, let's get to the gospel. So that's a big deal.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. Any questions? I know we just rambled for like a long time.
So
are you guys the one who started this?
No.
Or y'all just training it? Because
somebody trained us, just like we're walking through it with you.
Okay.
And then part of the goal is everything that you're trained on, you want to train somebody else on. And so, through a series of last several years, we've had the opportunity to train other believers and other churches and You start to, it becomes more of an outflow of a lifestyle of making disciples who make disciples. And so that's the real end goal here, is that you want to freely give it away. And that's what people did for us. They freely gave it away, say, hey, here's how you run with this, and coached us on it. And it's great, because they weren't like, and now when you train people, you tell them that we trained you, that you tell them that it's from us. Like that's not the point. It's, hey, it's nobody owns it. We all give it away.
Different church on Wednesday nights than here, and I really enjoy that church. But I'm going to talk to them this week, because I help out down there some, and I'm going to talk with them this week about the why of this.
Love it.
Talk to them a little bit about it. I talked to a preacher. There's a fabulous preacher, and he's gonna let me share that this week. Wednesday. Not the whole thing, obviously, I'm take about the why we should be so, diligent, thank you, about making sure we're sharing the word,
Yeah. Man, that's awesome.
That's great. Yeah.
Yeah. Let us know how that goes. Let's see. Would you want to train on the why at the training in March?
Possibly. Yes, I will. I'm going to say yes.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah, there you go.
All right. All right. We got
Michelle's
someone,
doing,
Michelle,
doing
for
the
the
why.
why. Speaking of, I know there was some questions about the date. Did we land one?
I think I went ahead and decided that the 11th is okay.
Okay.
Perfect.
So we're good to
It's
move
not gonna
forward with
be,
coming.
that's not gonna be okay for everybody, because our schedules are just messed up.
Yeah.
But, there'll be enough here that we can train whoever shows up for our, for our new groups, so.
Perfect.
Great.
What's the date?
The 11th.
The 11th of March.
Okay.
We're excited.
Yeah.
I'll get in touch with you guys to get a little bit more about what that day looks like.
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds great.
Yeah.
We'll go ahead and plan on traveling to be there for it too.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, but I Wednesday too.
So we just did a little bit of practice on the 15-second testimony. We want to set some goals again for this next week. So one of the goals is, we want somebody to come back and walk us through what the 3/3 looks like. So who wants to do that for us next week?
You're helping me.
Okay.
I need to do the move, because I think you can do it.
Yeah, I will do it. I'll do it.
Is that
Ann's doing that. Ann, is your name with an E or just Ann?
It's got an E. It's got an E on it.
It's got an
It's got an E. All right.
No, okay.
All right. And then the next goal for everybody is, so just like last week, the goal is to reach out to somebody on your Who map. This week, the goal is to share your 15-second testimony with somebody. So this can be a believer, a non-believer. Hopefully it's with somebody, maybe even from your Who map who you reached out to. But somebody that you can share your 15-second testimony with this week. So hopefully reaching out to someone and or even just looking for an opportunity, but the goal is to share that with someone this week. That's there.
And then we're going to also just continue to prayer walk our neighborhoods for 10 to 15 minutes this week.
Yep. And so next week is going to be, we're going to look at the same format, but it's going to be a little bit different. We're going to kind of speed through a little bit of the 3/3 because we want to spend a lot of time really walking through sharing the gospel and what that looks like. And so the majority of our time is going to be spent there. So the goals next week, Ann will walk us through the 3/3. Everybody continue to prayer walk your neighborhood and find somebody to share your 15-second testimony with. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
All right, one last question. Do these trainings, they usually do 6 weeks, 7 weeks? I'm counting days here, so I'm gonna have a discussion with them.
It's adaptable.
It's adaptable.
There's no set time. We could do 5 weeks, we could do 6 weeks, we could do 7 weeks. There's really we can divide it up however we need to. And that's part of why we're just figuring out the training date. So we figure out, okay, where do we need to land? All right. Well, does somebody want to pray for us that God would give us that opportunity this week? Go for it.
Awesome.
Father, we just love you and praise you. God, we just want to be your ambassadors. Father, we want to be those who you use to reconcile people unto yourself. Lord, help us to depend entirely upon you, Lord. Help us to realize that we're empowered. You've given us this opportunity to be a witness, Lord. So help us, God, each one of us to share what we've learned and to share that testimony. So that we can flip conversations, so we can get into spiritual talk relatively easy. God, it's all up to you. Lord. Just pray, Holy Spirit, you guide us in that way. In Jesus' name.
Amen.
Find anybody to do the Psalm 4?
So that's part of what's going to be a little different next week. We're
Okay.
going to race through some of those
Okay.
3/3 pieces so that we can spend a lot of time on the middle portion of going through the gospel.
Awesome. And I'm gonna get last week's video and this one out to y'all today. Sorry about last week. I'm trying to figure it out.
We appreciate y'all.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank
All
y'all.
right.
Y'all have a great
See
week.
y'all.
See y'all.
Bye, Joe.
Bye-bye. Have a good week.
Thanks, Joe.